Oh! Ah, low. Wow, that doesn't work. So extending the arm and closing the strings upon the racket drop in this way on the forehand does not work. Now I want you to put this into proper context. It does work if it happens inside a stroke, if it's happening at a faster pace. But if you find yourself coming into your forehand, dropping the racket consciously and then freezing the racket at this moment, this will absolutely destroy your forehand. Now I'm blaming Roger Federer for this. Roger, it's your fault, because I see so many juniors at tournaments here in Southeast Florida and their forehands look like this. They're playing and they're going here, now they're waiting for the ball like this, and you can see that they're trying to do the Federer forehand from a helicopter. It's really easy to see. Why is that? Because the continuity of the forehand is destroyed if we set the racket in this place and freeze it. What happens then is that we have to accelerate from zero, and it looks like a hectic rush shot where the timing is greatly compromised, as well as the power and the control. And yes, I was joking when I said it's Roger Federer's fault. Federer, of course, has this exact forehand. He does go back with the racket, he extends the arm and closes the string here. Now, unfortunately, players and coaches will look at this in slow motion and they misinterpret this as something that Federer is doing consciously. Federer has absolutely no idea what goes on with his racket in this area of the stroke. I want you to put this into the proper context of the forehand. When Federer or any other high-level player takes their racket back, the racket is going back slowly. Now when the racket begins to drop, it's going to pick up a little bit of speed. When we hit the bottom portion of the racket drop, that incoming ball is already going to be very close to the contact. Therefore, when we hit the bottom portion of the racket drop, the racket will be accelerated at very fast speeds. Therefore, players are not conscious of how their racket is positioned exactly when it's dropping. It could be positioned with the strings closed, or it could be positioned with the strings open. So how the racket is positioned on the bottom portion of the racket drop is up to a player's genetics, or in other words, style. This is absolutely not a fundamental element of the forehand. If you happen to have your racket more neutral as it drops, this is fine, but it's also perfectly fine to have the racket strings completely closed. And again, whichever style you have, this is going to happen inside of an area of the forehand that's happening so quickly, you're not going to be aware of what exact style you have, and you therefore shouldn't concern yourself with it. So in my demonstration at the beginning of this video, the fact that I was missing these forehands wildly wasn't because my racket face was closed necessarily. It was simply because the first thing I did on my forehand was drop the racket down, and I started my swing from this position. This is exactly what I see from a lot of juniors that are trying to adapt the Federer forehand. It looks something like this. The ball comes and the players are already here. Now they're moving around, and now they absolutely lose all the continuity of the forehand. You got to remember that the first part of the forehand, when we're taking the racket back, we're developing quite a bit of swing momentum that is completely eliminated when we start the forehand in this position. Now there are some theories out there that if you start the forehand from this position and you do this for a while, that if you then go more into a full loop, into more of a full take back, that the body will remember this movement and the racket is going to sit in this position just like Roger Federer. In my experience, this is not the case, because the bottom portion of the racket drop is so fast that this taps more into the genetics of a player. Whatever stylistic preference a player will have in that part of the forehand will be based on genetics, and is also happening without the players being conscious of it. So you will see a vast variety of styles in that area of the forehand among professional players. And look, I'm not saying this can't be trained. You could train for 5 years to learn the Federer forehand, and eventually the racket might start to go like this, just like Federer. But if this type of position of the racket prior to the forward phase doesn't fit your genetics, it doesn't fit your style, this will have absolutely no benefit on your forehand. In fact, adapting a stylistic element of the forehand that doesn't suit your body type might actually make your forehand worse. Now, what about topspin? Is there a relationship between a closed racket face on the bottom portion of the racket drop and how much spin a player is able to achieve? There's absolutely no relationship between those two things, because people that believe that this is true, they also believe that the racket face is closed at the moment of contact, which is not true. Even on players that have heavy topspin, the racket face is still neutral, or in some cases slightly closed, depending on the height of the ball and depending how close to the net they are. But in any case, on a high level forehand, there is more of a neutral position of the racket face. So what happens on players that have this closing of the strings on the bottom portion of the racket drop, when they start to go into the lag and into the forward phase of the swing, you will see that the strings will actually open up. So the racket will not stay like this. They will not approach the ball in this way, because they'll be guaranteed to hit the ball with a closed racket face, and it will result in a forehand that's very thin, and you will lose a tremendous amount of height and power. So naturally, all players, even if they have a more closed position of the racket face, as they initiate the forward phase of the stroke, the racket will even out, they will go into a neutral position, and then as they go forward, they will meet the ball with the racket head being more in a neutral position, which allows them to create heavy topspin if they have a vertical swing path. So what should you do? You shouldn't concern yourself with this part of the forehand at all, because what will happen is what happens to a lot of juniors nowadays, is you'll be stuck with an ugly, rushed, a hectic looking forehand that suffers from bad timing, lack of control and power, and people from a mile away will see that something seriously wrong with your forehand, for the simple reason that all the continuity will be destroyed on your forehand. Take another look. If I sit here for a while and I try to accelerate, you see how awkward that looks? Look again, I'm going to drop the racket here and I'm going to try to hit the ball. You see there's absolutely no continuity. The forehand looks stiff, as opposed to hitting this spot, whatever the racket position may be, continuously. Players get in and out of this area so quickly that if you watch, for example, Nadal or Federer in real time, you won't even catch what the racket is doing, how it's positioned, and so on. And I'll take another look at my forehand, where I'm going to continuously move in and out of that lower part of the racket drop area, and you won't even be able to catch how exactly my racket is positioned in that part of the forehand. And just next time you go on the court, just try to visualize the absurdity of trying to make this happen anyway, because when we're hitting the forehand, we're looking forward at the ball. We absolutely have no idea how the racket is positioned anyway. So for two reasons, this is going to be difficult to execute. Number one, in order for you to do this, what you're observing on Federer's slow motion footage, you would have to drastically slow down or stop your racket at this part of the forehand. In addition to that, because you're looking forward, it's very difficult to feel how exactly the racket is positioned. And next time you play and you hit a forehand, you try to visualize, hey, how was my racket positioned exactly? You won't be able to tell. And the reason why you won't be able to tell is because that part of the forehand is accelerating at a very fast speed. So guys, this right here is not necessarily wrong if it's happening continuously, and also if it's happening without you being conscious of it. Now, it is absolutely 100% wrong to put the racket in this position, or in any other position for that matter, and have the racket be frozen on the bottom portion of your forehand. You will completely destroy your continuity, and you'll be left with a forehand that has very little control. And by the way, that was not on purpose.